we have had leaders who have chosen a different path and proven themselves in various areas. So for the conversation today, we have somebody very special who had a computer degree, probably at the time wherein the things were going all about right onto the IT field, but chose to get into finance. And also even in finance, she chose to look at various fields, various sectors, and was able to make a very distinct impression across all these fields. It's an absolute privilege for me to have Tanushree joining us for this conversation. Thank you so much for your time, Tanushree.
Charudat, it's an absolute pleasure. We've worked in the past together. I have known you. So thank you for this opportunity of sharing my experience.
So I would like to start with the fundamental question. A computer engineering degree followed by a finance. How did that happen?
I'm a Marwadi Banya. I made a mistake by doing computer engineering. Core competency is finance. No, I think to give you a little bit of perspective, right? I was born in a family where both my Nana and Dada were very, very particular about all their children, irrespective of whether they were girls or boys, getting to do good education in the fields of their choice. Right. So, for example, my own mother, she is a BA LLB. Plus, she learned music from Pandit Vishwamohan Bhatt. She used to sing on All India Radio. And my buas on the other side, one is an MA in Sanskrit, one is an MA in music, and one is an MA in home economics. Not home science, but home economics. So, I come from that background, and we're three sisters. So my parents encouraged us to do whatever we wanted. My older sister is a nutritionist and a dietitian with a very successful brand of health foods. My younger sister is a very successful lawyer. And I always liked computer science. So even in school, when we had the option of taking economics or computer science, I picked computer science in 11th, 12th in Bombay, which is junior college. I didn't take biology. I took physics, chemistry, maths, and computer science. And honestly, I got lucky that, in the 12th, I scored very well. I hadn't planned on doing engineering, but I scored well. And then I said that, I like the subject of computer science, so why not do engineering in that? I also knew, let's be honest, I knew that I was not going to do a master's and I was not going to be a techie, right? For me, it was a love for the subject that I took the course. And I think pretty much when I graduated, the dot-com bubble had just burst. So one needed to find another job, and I had to wait out for my offers from Wipro and Emphasis to be called out. But, in the meanwhile, the thought process was, because I was working, it was not that I was not working. The thought process was, why not do an MBA? And that's when, incidentally, we are talking about Navaratri, we are talking about women power. It was my mother who introduced INSEAD to me.
Okay.
I was applying to US schools in LBS, and my mother read about INSEAD, and she said, listen, have you ever thought about this school? And I read about INSEAD, and I said, such a diverse international student body. It's in France. I'd never lived in Europe, had by then traveled only once to Europe. So I said, this could be a life-changing experience for me, which it was. And I was lucky to have, been accepted to INSEAD. So thanks to my mother and thanks to my parents, who never brought me up as a girl, who brought me up as an individual, that I went to INSEAD. Post INSEAD, I was in London for 6 years. And even at INSEAD, if you ask any of my classmates who knew me, they will turn around and say, oh, she only had one point agenda to get into investment banking. And I think for me, it was twofold, right? One was the banking industry gives you an extremely good foundation in finance. Plus, it gives you a very broad view of the world. And personally, I knew that I didn't want to get into M&As because I was not very keen on doing financial engineering. So what I decided was that I wanted to be a part of the market side, which would give me a look into how the markets operated and what the corporates really gained from the markets. And I was lucky enough to come across an opening with what was then HVB, second largest German bank. Now it's UniCredit. And they had a team that used to do convertible bonds, equity linked, as we called it. And it was amongst the top 5 teams in Europe at that point in time. So I joined them saying it's a small team doing good work. I'll get good exposure. I joined them. I didn't know the eye of investment banking. I had never worked in London. I never lived outside of India except for a year when, as a family, we lived in Southeast Asia. But I was very young at that point in time. So completely life altering decision after INSEAD was to move to London to stand on my 2 feet. I knew nobody there. I had to search for a job, and I joke about it कि वो हिंदी फिल्मों का हीरो होता है ना जिसकी चप्पल घिस जाती है नौकरी ढूंढ ढूंढ के. Honestly, I've had that experience. So, if I'll take 5 minutes on this, and this is what I want to share, we all talk about our pleasant experiences in life. So I was the youngest in my INSEAD class, and I didn't get a job when I graduated. So I had to look for a job. And around me, all my friends were finding jobs. And I had taken a personal oath that I wouldn't take money from my father while I was staying in London looking for a job. Very interestingly, 2 of my friends, they said that, listen, we have space with us. Why don't you come and stay with us? I come from an all-girls family. These were 2 men, and I was living in their living room, sleeping on a folding bed. But very grateful to them for giving me a roof over my head and for allowing me to look for opportunities. But those were very trying times because, you're living with people who are doing good work, who are going to work daily, and you're literally searching for a job, right? And so it was a very tough time. But I think that's also given me the confidence of saying, throw me into the deep end of the pool and I'll come out of it. Because very different living circumstances, didn't have money, didn't know people, and I didn't know what the next hour would bring for me. Forget the next day, right? But having found a job at HVB all on my own, of course, gratitude to the God above who's looking after all of us. I'm a deep believer in God. And thanks to the blessings of my parents. So then my journey started. And I think after that, I've just been blessed to have worked with people who have been super encouraging of me. So to cut short, I worked at HVB, and then my next life-changing moment came in when I joined KBC. Now, Darren Carter, who was the CEO of KBC, he told me to come and set up the business for KBC, right? And specifically for India. Now, I was an Indian, but I had never worked in India before. So I had joked with Darren saying, you're giving me a budget to just go home. You're giving me a budget to fly from London to India. But I think the confidence that he put in me, right, forced me to really think out of the box and to ensure that I was able to create something that we could all be proud of. And eventually, we set up a partnership with Kotak Mahindra in India. In 2007, we had a number of options, but Kotak stood out. And what an opportunity, because I was leading that partnership and I had the opportunity to work closely with people like Uday Kotak, Shanti Ekambaram, Falguni Nayyar, Ramesh Srinivasan. And today, when I look back, I am so humbled with all the learnings that I got by working with these people who are just such senior professionals, accomplished professionals, but also extremely, extremely nice individuals, right? And during that partnership, I got to know IDFC, and I had an offer from them. And that opened the doors for me to come back to India. I came to India with dreams, of deepening the debt capital markets, of saying we will ride a product wave which would create a yield curve in the country and we change the way the markets operate. 20 years on after my MBA, when I first did a study on the debt capital markets or the non-existence of debt capital markets in India, the situation hasn't changed. So within 8 months of my joining IDFC, it was very clear that the dreams that I had were just dreams. And at that point in time, the option was to go back to London. I decided to stay back and become a generalist, started covering the auto component sector at IDFC as a generalist banker, something that I never wanted to do. And that's where I learned never say never. And I got Nalanda Capital to invest 10% in NRB, which is when I got to know the company and when I got to know the promoters very well. And when my predecessor at NRB quit, the current MD and even the then MD of NRB, Hashbina, she called me up for asking for some recommendations of people that they could recruit as a CFO. And I gave her a couple of names and she said, why would they join us? And I said, because one, from a governance standpoint, NRB stands out. As a banker, you hear unsavory things about companies, not one about NRB. You've got a great product, you've got a great standing in your product, and I think the company can truly be an international company. So she said, why don't you join us? And, my first response to her was, you do know that I'm not a CFO. And she said, well, I want a strategic CFO. So I think Hashbina was somebody who took a leap of faith, like Darren took a leap of faith in me. And she gave me this opportunity. And I think after KBC, the best career decision that I have made has been to join NRB. I was with NRB for 6.5 years. And I got to do multitude of things outside of finance and IT, right? But more importantly, I think it made me realize that I like operations a lot more than advisory. So for me, it became, I found my true calling. It also gave me a true insight into the real India. My father, who's been a manufacturing person all his life, when I was debating whether I should join NRB or not, I had another offer at that point in time. And he told me, he said, for all the bravado that you bankers have, right, that you understand economy and what drives the economy, manufacturing karke dikhao, fir baat karenge. And I think it's very humbling. It's very humbling to be in manufacturing and to realize the ground realities of our countrymen, colleagues who on the shop floors create the product that actually then generates the wealth for the country, right? And their living conditions are not the easiest. So today, I again have a lot of gratitude for having gotten the opportunities, the comforts, and the experiences in life that I have, because there is a whole set of people who create the wealth, right? Who are responsible for creating that wealth, who don't have those, right? After 6.5 years at NRB, came another point where I got an opportunity to experience startups, right? And this was taking me back to my love of debt capital markets. So I happened to meet Vaibhav Gupta, VG, who's a co-founder and now the CEO of Udan. And when I met him for the first time, he was not looking at a role for me. I was just meeting him because I'd heard about Udan and I'd heard great things about Udan. And then he told me about the fintech that Udan had and how they were trying to create a digital lending platform. And I said, this is again an opportunity for me to contribute to the non-existing debt capital markets and contribute to creating SME financing, right?
Yes.
It's such a big need for the country.
I agree.
I joined Udan a week before the first lockdown in India.
My God, what a time.
Yeah, so I joined a new company, a new business in a completely new time for the world. But what an experience. What a tremendous experience, because I think uh, it's a great organization, fabulous, fabulous vision. But more importantly, it really showed me up close and personal what it means to fail fast, what it means to keep going back to the drawing board and having iterative processes. It strengthened my ability. And I'm somebody who's very comfortable with ambiguity, right? But it strengthened my ability to deal with ambiguity. It also sort of expanded my muscles on dealing with complexity of business, complexity of shareholders, complexity of ambiguity, in all shapes and forms, right? uh, I think 2 years at Udan were equal to 4 years anywhere else. Have a lot of respect and regard for that organization. But after 2 years, I decided to come back to manufacturing, and I joined Lakshmi Organics, which is a leading chemicals manufacturer in India. And I'm very glad to have joined an organization that in 32 years has grown from zero to 3,000 crores in revenue. In 30 years, it's become not just an India leader, but a global player in the products that we manufacture, right?
Yes.
And it's a company that has a legacy where employee number one is still with the company, and the employee number one is not the promoter. It's a gentleman who works in my team, right? It's also given me a very interesting insight into the world of commodities, which drive the global economics today, right?
Yes.
And for the last 18 months, I've seen up close and personal how oil prices and how commodity prices impact global businesses, right? It's also a great insight to me, in the last 18 months to see how chemicals actually is not known, but impacts us from the time we wake up, from the toothpaste we use, to the time we go to sleep, right? Because all the electric instruments that we use need chemicals, right? So it touches each aspect of our life, and that's been my journey. Something that
Coming,
I've partly carved out, partly been lucky to have had people who believed in me.
thank you so much for such a candid journey and the moments that you shared. I am pretty sure a lot of us would be able to resonate how it happens and what it makes you stand out. I would like to understand one thing. You looked at moving into a different industry, getting out of comfort zone sometimes become very difficult as you start progressing in career. How do you manage to do that?
So that's a super interesting question, right? Um, I think so. Getting out of comfort zones is not new to me. Adaptability comes, or till a certain point, it came naturally to me, and I'll tell you why. As in my growing up years, right? I went to till my 10th standard. I went to 6 different schools. As a family, we've lived in multiple places within India and then Southeast Asia, right? So for me, I had to evolve as a child in getting out of a comfort zone and adapting myself to a culturally a new place and then getting comfortable in that. So that, of course, conditioned me differently. But yes, in the recent years, of course, taking a risk or making that change brings in the bias of experiences that we have, right? Or
Yes.
or I have. And I think one thing that has helped me break that or snap out of it has been going back to my journey looking for a job in London. And for me, it's been saying you had the confidence to look for something in a geography that you didn't know, in an industry that you didn't know, in a place where you didn't know anybody. There was no godfather, there was no support system, right? Except for these two friends that I spoke about. And every time I think that I could do that, now with my experiences, my network, and with the skill sets that I have developed, right, I'm more confident of saying, I have to get out of my comfort zone, learn something new, and grow as a individual, more as a professional, more than as a professional, as an individual. So I think that one experience really pushes me and says, if you could do it then, you can do it now.
Great. You said that you're very comfortable dealing with ambiguity, right? This is something that we also, the VUCA world and all, we keep on hearing all the terms around it. But frankly speaking, the industry today is going through a very accelerated transition that is making a lot of people nervous. So how do you deal with, how you would guide people who are, say, much into numbers, who want that kind of a clarity which doesn't exist today? So how would you guide them to deal with that uncertainty?
So, I think I'll take the example of COVID, right? It was the most unprecedented times that anybody had, and we all had to deal with it. Now, at during that time, I had joined a business I didn't understand very well, an industry that I didn't understand very well, right? How did I deal with it? So for me, the way I deal with uncertainty is that from whatever is in front of me, I will separate out what do I understand and what do I not understand. From what I don't understand, then there are the controllables and then there are the non controllables. So, what I start to do is what I can control, I start to work on that. I'll give you a very tangible example. So, I didn't understand business, but I understood balance sheets and I understood the NBFC's lending business, right? I didn't understand the whole e commerce retail business as well. So, my first thought was we didn't know how COVID would pan. We had a certain amount of funding that was available with us. We had lent out money to people. We didn't know whether that money would come back or not, which could then impact the funds available to grow the business. So the first port of call was we control the money that we've lent out, understand that very well. Can we run a stress test on this? So ran a stress test, worked with the larger teams because we had a large logistics team, a large sales team, to figure out how the high street shopkeepers that we had sold or given out money to, thinking about their loans. And the feedback came that none of them were worried if the situation eased within 3 months. So that provided a lot of clarity in saying that your money is safe, right? Then there was the non-controllable or the other element of saying, how is the economy going to pan out? And so we had this task force that we'd created at Udan that used to meet at 9 o'clock every morning, where we were trying to ascertain how the lockdown would reopen and how the economy would pan out, right? None of us had any idea. So again, the idea was, what do I understand? What do I not understand? So divided it in those two parts, and from what I didn't understand, what could I understand? So when it came to the broader economic scenario, I actually drew out all the industries separately that contributed to the Indian GDP, looked at their supply side and their demand side. And I created an Excel sheet that told me how the supply side would be impacted, how the demand side would be impacted, and hence what would be the impact on the GDP. And I came back with a figure that the GDP would be down by 13%. Everybody was talking about 6, 7% at that point in time. Eventually, it was closer to the 13% number, right? Uh, so I think that's how I became comfortable with the ambiguity, because I had some anchor in my mind, right? The second point, when would the lockdown open up, right? None of us had any idea. So again, kept reading about it, kept talking to people to figure out what others were thinking, because I think there is a lot of merit in getting different perspectives, right? So I think this is one strategy that I use, that whenever I am trying to deal with somebody which is ambiguous, unknown to me, something I don't understand, or I don't know how to deal with. I go to people who either are experts in that field or people who are more experienced than me, people that I trust, to get different perspectives, because that helps me open up my mind and think differently. And I think that's one thing which in the field of finance, uh, we rarely don't do. When we are looking at numbers, we give numbers a lot more importance. What we need to actually focus on is how have those numbers come into shape, and
Agree.
how can those numbers be changed? And I think that's where going to the business owners or the genesis point of those numbers makes a lot of difference.
Completely agree. Now, here comes the other bit, which is now that we are discussing this part, the next thing that comes, that when I see the younger workforce coming in, I don't see that kind of a grounding around what I maybe with the age, the very fact that you had a career, you are so candid about it, how it has grown. But when I look at the new generation coming in, I see a lot of them coming in from a very different background. So their response to the uncertainty at times is very different. So, what would you guide? How would you guide them to see and look at the things the way you are able to explain today?
So, my experience with dealing with the youngsters, okay, has been that they have grown up in an environment where they didn't see uncertainty, right? So, talk about when you and I were growing up, okay? Whether we did CA or engineering, we didn't have a Google to help us with answers. We had to go to the library, we had to search for books. If we didn't understand anything, we didn't have a YouTube to put on to sort of answer our questions. We had to go to a professor to say, explain to us how this works, right? So I think number one is understanding that this generation has not grown up with uncertainty, because today they have too many tools available to take away uncertainty from them. So I think once we start empathizing with that, we'll be able to deal. At least when I have started acknowledging this, I have been able to deal with them better. I'll give you two examples, right? One was at NRB when we recruited a few youngsters, and with two of them, the roles that we had recruited them for had morphed into something else. And they were not comfortable with it. The retort that came to me was, you had recruited us for something, this is not what we are getting. Secondly, what are the tangible skills that I'm going to get from the new role? And if I'm not getting tangible skills, how does that prep me for my career onwards? And I think I had to sit them down to explain to them that look, business works, business can be dynamic. Your roles have changed because the company suddenly realized that those two roles are not what's going to take us to the next level. So we need to look at life differently. And then talking about tangible and intangible skills are equally important as the tangible skills to succeed in a career, right? But I think for me, the starting point was understanding where they were coming from, and then sitting and again understanding what was the cause of discomfort or anxiety with them. I think the younger generation is not comfortable with ambiguity. They want everything which is instantaneous. And I think that is where, as senior professionals, the only way we can relate with them is to be empathetic and to be patient. I don't have a cookie cutter answer of saying, explain it to them in this way, right? I've given you one example, but there are other things which are going through my mind where maybe it took me many conversations with them to be able to get rid of their discomforts, right? Because there is no solution. I think the only thing that has worked for me is understanding where they are coming from. The second thing is I deal with my niece and nephew, right? My niece is 19, my nephew is 15. And and the realization that they don't have uncertainty is when I observe them closely, right? My nephew, when he wants to, he's great with automotive engineering at the age of 15. He does new creations because he goes to YouTube, he sees how to do something, then he puts his 3D printer to use. My niece is pursuing law, she'll do the same thing, you know. She's having difficulty, she'll Google for a particular case law, read it, and she has an answer. So I think interacting closely with them has also given me a little bit of understanding. But what has also made me realize after engaging with them so closely is that we need to give them different perspectives. It's the same thing, like I said, right? When I'm dealing with ambiguity, I need different perspectives. They also need different perspectives. So I think that's the other thing that I deal with youngsters who are in my team as well when dealing with uncertainty, to be able to give them a different perspective. It takes iterations, it takes patience. But I think that's the only way. There is no cookie cutter answer for this.
Thank you so much for setting the expectations absolutely loud and clear on this video, because everybody needs to understand that part. The last question. You're right now looking at a different kind of workforce which is coming back. The women, particularly the girls who are coming into the workforce, are coming in with a lot of different expectations. Sometimes the conventional way that we have seen it, sometimes looking at a lot of careers around social media, and there's a lot of influence that you see for different kind of careers compared to the core. And the attraction to come towards the core is reducing very substantially. That's what I see. So how do you see, what is it that people need to core in the core industry need to do to get this talent in, and what is it that the younger generation needs to see for them to look at this industry effectively?
What a brilliant question. So I think the youngsters in general are not attracted to the core businesses because we appear very boring to them, right? Uh, Manufacturing is not sexy. Pardon my French, but you know what goes out on Instagram is.
Yes.
And I think at some point in time to get that talent in, we've got to change. And you know that change can be very subtle, from the way our offices are designed, to the way we design our working hours, to the way we design our positions, to the way we deal with hierarchy. I think the one thing that this generation doesn't like is hierarchy. A lot of the new generation that's coming in wants to make an impact. And I go back to what I said earlier, right? They don't have patience. They want everything which is instantaneous. And a loud and clear message to this generation is there's only one thing which is instantaneous that works, and that also maybe, which is coffee. Other than instant coffee, even instant noodles don't taste good, right? So anything which is worth something in life needs time. But they've not seen it, right? So when they see hierarchy, they actually see that their impact is getting reduced, and that is something that gives them discomfort. So as legacy organizations, or as core organizations, we need to change the way hierarchy is set up. So if we change the way our offices look, if we change the way the work hours are, give them flexi work hours, if we change the way the designations sound, if we change our hierarchies, and we can show them the impact that they can have within our organizations on the end result, I think we definitely can attract them.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation and so many amazing insights. Thank you so much, Tanushree.
Thank you, Charu. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.